Hi, everyone. We're going to get started now. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. We have some great guests to chat with, and we're going to talk about voter registration. I know that often when we hear about voter registration, people talk about it as a really important part of participating in our elections, and it is. Like, you have to be registered to vote in all but one state to actually vote. But if you're here with us today, you're probably already registered to vote, and we don't need to tell you to do that. So what we want to talk about today is voter registration as an important strategic decision for winning, not just participating in campaigns. So with that, I'm going to invite our two panelists, Ray and Luke, to the stage so we can get started with the conversation. Hi, how are y'all?
Good.
Sorry, I'm saying that I didn't just talk to y'all 5 minutes ago, but we're just going to get started. Luke, we can start with you. I just want to give you both an opportunity to introduce yourselves, and then we'll jump right into the conversation.
Cool, sounds great. Thanks, Shaniqua. Hey, everyone, my name's Luke Warford. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at the Texas Democratic Party.
Everybody, my name is Raymond Paultre, and I'm the Executive Director of the Florida Lion or Donor Table.
Cool. Okay. Ray, this first question is for you about Florida. And hopefully no offense is taken, but I guess I can speak for both of you. But in 2008 and 12, President Obama won Florida. And I think it made a lot of people think, okay, this is a state that Democrats can, they'll have to fight in, but can rely on. But in 2018 and 2020, Democrats didn't flip any seats. The state didn't flip for Biden. In 2018, they actually lost a Senate seat, which was really hard to see, in some House seats last year. So all of that said, a lot of people have said there's no need to invest in Florida. Why would you, I'm assuming, disagree with that assessment? And how are you going to approach the electoral opportunities that exist for progressives in the state next year?
Yeah, don't listen to those people. Like, I just start off by that, right? Like, I mean, these are the same type of folks who are writing off Florida now. They were the same type of folks who were writing off Georgia 10 years ago, Arizona 10 years ago. There's sort of two types of Democrats. There's Democrats that think in sort of 10 and 20-year terms, and then those that think cycle to cycle. The ones that think cycle to cycle, they're like more fun to listen to because they have hot takes and they get on shows. But the truth of the matter is they're not generational sort of operatives or generational contributors to this movement. And I think for like Texas, I'm so happy and proud of states like Georgia. We understand ourselves to be part of a generational struggle. So that's number one. Is I would take all that with a grain of salt. I would also say the state has actually shown itself, when properly resourced, when it has time and scale and focus, to be able to pass some pretty progressive things. I mean, Amendment 4, which was the restoration of rights for returning citizens, fair districts, which helped to build in a constitutional requirement for fair redistricting in the state. Medical marijuana. These aren't things that conservatives were banging on the door to get passed. And in our state, they passed at 60+%. So what that tells me is that the state is actually capable of delivering progressive victories when properly resourced and when we have time to actually communicate with voters. One of the problems that Florida has had is it folks spend a lot of money here late, and then that aggregate number, and think that actually makes a difference. Florida's not a speedboat; it's a cruise liner. It takes time and it takes resources and actually to turn it around. I would also say that a lot of Democratic operatives, funders, and strategists thought that in 08 and 12 that the Obama coalition was just going to naturally be held together. I don't know why, but we saw a drop in investment in state infrastructure. And state infrastructure, I mean, if you forget about states will forget about you. And speaking of voter registration, Florida had a 700,000 Democratic voter registration advantage in 2014 at the height of the Obama administration. It's now down to 23,000. Voter registration is one of the most simple things you can do. And it's also an indication of the health of your infrastructure and the health of early money in your state. What that tells me, and what it should tell everybody, is that over the last 10 years, Democratic donors, investors, and strategists have tried a late money approach to Florida, and we've paid the price for it. Florida is not alone in that. And so, I think for us in the state, we remain optimistic. Just 3 years ago, Bill Nelson, who no one would claim to be a liberal, icon necessarily, although he's an icon in Florida, lost by 10,000 votes. And then also in the same election, Andrew Gillum, who nobody would claim to be a moderate icon, lost the state by 35,000 votes. And so, if we were Republicans, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? To see the state that the other side absolutely needs to have. And so, we're out here doing the work, organizations like ours, organizations on the ground, the party, the caucuses, and we would just have to understand that we're at a building stage right now, but this is still a 1% state. This is still a state that is going to be decided by tens of thousands of voters, and that voter registration advantage has to turn around now in order for us to be competitive.
Yeah, I think that's really important to bring up. It's not like people were losing by millions of votes in Florida. They're close races, but at the end of the day, people only pay attention to the specific outcome. Luke, I'm gonna go over to you now. So a little different from Florida in looking at recent wins, but more so, very slowly chipping away at Republican margins. And a lot of people thought last year would be the year that Texas actually turned blue, but it wasn't. And so there's still some more work to do. So how are you, what work needs to be done? What challenges are there preventing you from, well, I don't want to say preventing, making it take a little bit longer to get to that point? And then if you could just touch on, we're talking about voter registration. Something I've heard a lot about Texas is it's not a red state, it's a state that doesn't vote. And you turned out a lot of people last year, but it still wasn't quite enough. So how are you approaching all of those things to start to actually get toward flipping the state?
Yeah, for sure. And, I thank Shaniqua, and I totally agree with a lot of the things that Ray said, right? In order to turn, especially states as large as Florida, as large as Texas blue, it takes early investment, it takes year-long investment. I think where Texas and Florida differ a little bit, right, is Texas is Florida is a late money state, right? Texas for the last several decades has just been a no money state from the Democratic side, right? If you think about the types of investment that it would take to turn this state blue, and compared to the amount of money that are spent in other states, like we're just not getting the type of national investment that it would take. But that seems like a negative thing, or that seems like a challenge, but I think it's also an opportunity, right? You look at Texas in 2020, where, yeah, we had high aspirations to try to flip the state and turn it blue for the first time in 30 years. But we actually only lost by 5.5 points. And when you compare that to a lot of states that got a lot more investment than we did, and when you look at it, sort of the changes historically over time, right? In 2004, Texas was an R+23 state, right? And each cycle, we're progressively moving in the right direction. You look at the data over time, it's this consistent trend line, right? And that's mostly exciting to me, right? That is an opportunity. And here at the Texas Democratic Party, like the reason we're excited about voter registration and are excited that you guys are convening this conversation is that when we think about that trend line, like voter registration literally changes the slope of that line. Like that's what we're doing with registering voters. We're changing the underlying makeup of the electorate and increasing the chances that the state is going to go blue. I think Ray touched on a really good point earlier, which is that none of this work, and especially in states like Georgia, I think like that's incredibly clear from Stacey Abrams, but it's true in Florida and it's true here in Texas. This isn't the work of an individual cycle. The way that we should be thinking about this is over the next decade. And our goal, in any individual election, obviously we want Texas to go blue, but our goal over the next decade with voter registration is to slowly and consistently change the makeup of the state so that in 2018, maybe we had a 10% chance of going Democratic. In 2020, maybe it was 20%. Maybe this cycle it's 30, maybe next cycle it's 40. The point is eventually it's going to be a state that is actually favored to go blue. And that's worth chasing because, after the recent census, we've got 40 electoral votes, and they're just like, that will fundamentally, when Texas goes blue, which, everyone says it's a question of if, not when, like that will fundamentally change the makeup of the American political system forever, right? There is no path to the White House without Texas for Republicans. And so I think we're really excited about the work that we're doing on voter registration to bring more folks into the fold. I think the last thing I'll say is just that, we also have a massive number of unregistered voters in Texas. There's more than 3 million unregistered folks here, which is literally the voting age population of the entire state of Nevada. That's how many folks are unregistered here. So there's just a huge opportunity to get new people registered, to bring them into the fold, and to get Texas to go Democratic once and for all, right?
Yeah. And both of you talked about Georgia, and so I just want our audience to know, as both Luke and Ray said, like Georgia, it didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen right after Stacey Abrams lost. It didn't happen when she began her campaign, but that work started a decade before, which is a really big part of the reason we launched No Off Years. This is the first year we have it, but you will see it every year that's considered an off year, because we want people to be engaged all the time so that we can start to chip away in states like Texas and maybe some other states that we're not even thinking about right now, where there are opportunities for Democrats. I'm just going to ask you all one more question, same question, before we go over to audience questions. I just want to give each of you a chance, and Ray, we can start with you, just like to walk our audience today through like exactly what you're doing with your registration plan. Who are you focused on? How are you going to get them registered? And then how that carries over to actually getting them to vote for the people that you're supporting.
Yeah. Good question. So for us as a donor investment network, we take a both and approach. We believe that in order for the progressive movement to be successful, we need a strong party and strong caucuses, and we need a healthy ecosystem of independent organizations. If you go back into sort of like modern progressive wins, whether or not they be civil rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, workers' rights, it was this constellation of a strong Democratic Party and candidates working with labor organizations, independent organizations, advocacy organizations. And so we take the same approach with voter registration. We believe that the Florida Democratic Party needs to have the resources to register Democrats, point blank. We also believe that the constellation of independent organizations, which really focus on power building in the state and giving a voice to communities that have not had the infrastructure and voice, also have a place. And so for us at the Alliance, we fund both voter registration at the party, and we fund 501c4 and 501c3 voter registration. And so our partners on the 501c4 side, America Votes helps us out a lot when it comes to allocating resources to organizations in the state. We have a really awesome list of 8 or 9 organizations that we're working with on coordinated plans to really chip away at that voter registration number, and obviously working with the party to make sure we're registering as many Democrats as possible. The margin of victory will be decided this cycle and in future cycles by this voter registration effort. And I also just want to make a plug to down ballot races too. I think for states like ours, one of the issues that Democrats have had over the last 40 years is this obsession with federal races, and Republicans have noticed, and they've basically flipped our advantage in state houses and governorships on us. And so we have to stop thinking so binary about wins and losses. Texas should not only be held accountable to whether or not it is successful a presidential state. Florida should not as well. There are important school board races, there are important House races and state Senate races in which voter registration can literally, like 5,000 voter registrations can make a difference. And hopefully you'll be able to teach your son about Martin Luther King without some school board getting in the way of it. And voter registration can really make a difference at a local level. So I want to make sure we're lifting that up as well.
Thanks, Luke. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just to Ray, just to reinforce that point, right? You look at, there's been a lot of media coverage about all the terrible stuff happening in the Texas legislature this year, including most recently the abortion ban that got signed. And just to put a fine point on how important down ballot races are, we lost control of the Texas House by 9 seats, right? But 23,000 total votes across those 9 seats, right? Which if with very targeted voter registration investments, there's plenty of unregistered voters in all of those districts to have won all of them if we had made the right investments at the right times. And obviously, it's not that easy to know ahead of time, but just the margins really are, obviously you think about states like Texas, you think about states like Florida, and they seem massive, but the margins for a lot of these races down ballot are incredibly thin. And the outcomes matter, right? The Texas legislature is doing stuff that maybe matters more than what the governor is doing a lot of times. And so I think it just is incredibly important to be doing that work. Just to talk quickly about our voter registration plan, I am biased here. I work at the state party, so I obviously think partisan voter registration at state parties is really important. Just because I think we're focused on closing vote margins, right? And so we can be even more targeted in who we're registering, even more precise in who we're bringing to the table, and I think more effectively, more efficiently close the gap. Obviously, the work happening with C3s is incredibly important as well. But just to give you a minute about Project Texas, which is our voter registration plan. So a lot of organizations, a lot of voter reg groups basically think about like one voter registration approach or tactic, right? They'll set up tables on campuses, and that's how they'll register folks. But what we're doing at the Texas Democratic Party is we've got this plan called Project Texas, where we're actually testing 6 different voter registration approaches across different demographic groups and different geographies. Our theory is that it might take a different approach to register a Black voter in Dallas versus a Latino voter in Zapata County and in South Texas. And what we're doing is we're actually testing those 6 different approaches across the course of running up to our primary. We're going to then rigorously monitor what works and what doesn't, and what communities and populations those different approaches work with. And then the theory is that that's going to be able to make us scale most effectively and efficiently over the course of next year, right? And really like make investments in these communities and continue to engage. Shaniqua, you asked about turnout and how we actually get people to go vote. It's like I get asked that question all the time, right? Well, what about turnout, right? Vote registration's fine, but what about turnout? And they're just 2 sides of the same coin, right? One of the reasons that it matters for the Texas Democratic Party to be the organization that registers you is because that helps you start to develop a relationship with the party, with the party's brand. And so when you hear from a party organizer 3 months later, you're like, oh, these are the Democrats. These are the issues they're asking me about. And so when a candidate ultimately comes and asks for your vote and has that Texas Democratic Party name next to their name on the ballot, that really matters. And I think that, in the long term, that's going to have a really big effect.
Okay, we have like 5 minutes left. So I'm going to ask an audience question we have, which is simple enough. Are there ways that people can volunteer with you all right now to help register voters? And I guess I should say whether they're in or outside of Florida and Texas. Whoever wants to go first.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So Texas has some of the most pernicious voter registration laws in the country. And we have this law that doesn't make any sense called the Volunteer Deputy Registrar Law, which says you can only register voters if you are deputized by the county, and you can only register, you can only become a volunteer deputy registrar if you are a registered voter in the state of Texas. So if you are not in Texas, you cannot come to Texas and register voters, which is deliberate. So genuinely, the most valuable thing you can do to help us register voters right now is to donate to on our website, donate through the fund that the folks at Vote Save America are doing. That is what we need more than anything, is we need resources to run these programs, to hire people from the communities where we want to register voters, and be able to pay them consistently to do this work year round. That being said, there are plenty of opportunities to get involved in the work we're doing remotely or here in Texas. And you can go to our website, texasdemocrats.org, and sign up. There's a volunteer button there, and sign up, and we'll get you involved.
Listen, if Texas don't want you, come to Florida. We get to do anything down here. No, I kid. But if you're ever in Florida, come, Shaniqua, we can share information on volunteer opportunities with the organizations that we support, including the FDP. But I would say early investment in voter registration is critical. And I just want to sort of second what Luke is saying about needing resources now in order to start communicating with voters now.
Yes, and I should be plugging the fund. So we launched a fund on Monday. It's our No Off Years fund, and right now it's focused on voter registration. And we really want you all to understand and know, and a lot of you probably know this already, but we hope that you will act on it if you're able to, that the earlier the money comes in, the better. If you all were part of our Adopt a State program or donated to our Get Mitch fund last year, you probably know that a ton of money came in toward the end, and it was great, but it would have been much better if all of that millions of dollars had come in a lot sooner. And so we're making, we are asking you to check out our votesaveamerica.com page, votesaveamerica.com/donate page to learn more about why it's important to give early. Do you want to, before I read the question, do you want to answer it?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Okay, we have a question from the audience. Will Beto run?
I think he was quoted in Texas Monthly this morning saying he is very seriously considering it. I think there's a lot of incredible candidates up and down the ballot for all different races across the state of Texas. I think Beto is one of them. He I think showed really clearly and really strongly last year with the work that he did through Powered by People and in partnership with the state party, that he really cares about the mission, right? He really cares about getting Democrats elected up and down the ballot here in Texas. And he's continued to fight for our communities and fight for Texans. And so we would love to see him run, just like we would love to see anybody who's qualified and wants to, fight for their communities, put their name in there.
Okay. Now that we have heard some about Beto, I will give you the last word. Luke, we can start with you. Is there anything else you want our audience to know and understand about the importance of voter registration as it comes to progressive victories next year and this year for the elections that are happening this year?
Yeah, I'm still thinking about the Beto question. I just think it's something that we know works, right? Like there's people come in at the last moment and spend hundreds of millions of dollars on TV ads, and they spend, money on all this advertising and, late in the cycle investment that doesn't get spent as efficiently as effectively as it could. And I think like the work that we saw in Georgia is just, the proof is in the outcomes, right? That doing this work, doing it early, doing it year round is effective, and it builds power, and it builds power at the state level and the local level. So just like really appreciate you guys doing this work and everyone who's on right now. And, I'm excited for what we're doing here in Texas. And I think it's going to be an exciting 2022.
Awesome. And Ray, you get the final word.
Oh, I don't want the final word. Okay, I'll just say this. I think that I often get asked, the biggest difference between Republicans and Democrats, and I often say empathy and discipline. We have more empathy and they have more discipline. Voter registration is about discipline. It's about making sure that you are doing the work year round. It's a part of a year-round campaign. It is the obligation of Democrats and progressives. It is both simple, important, and can have the greatest impact than any other tactic. This is a state, Florida, for example, that went for Bush by 5 points and then went for Obama by 3 points. We're talking about an 8-point swing. Obama in 2008 and 2012 registered more voters in those two cycles than had ever been registered in Florida before. That is not a coincidence. And so if we want to win, we've got to start talking to voters, and voter registration is the best early mechanism to do that. And I would also note, while you have a popular president is actually the best time to do it. Doing it later when things get more contentious, just from a strategy perspective. So if you're thinking about your dollar is much more valuable now than it is next year. And I know that Luke would agree with that.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us today. I was, again, really excited to have this conversation, and I hope that everyone who joined us today will go check out votesaveamerica.com/donate to learn about the importance of supporting voter registration that's happening in I can't remember all the states. There's a list of states on that page.
Only. No, I kid.
But thank you all, and everyone have a nice evening. Yeah, evening.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks, Shaniqua.